Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. Today we are doing a fun video and it is going to start with an unboxing. This is my new Wild Book Box. This is a secondhand book subscription service here in Australia that send you books based on your preferences. I've done a few vlogs where I read these mystery books before, so we're going to get stuck straight in and see what they've sent me this time. They always come so beautifully packaged. They're all individually wrapped up. You often get a bookmark and some little notes from Natalie, the lady who runs this, and there's also some like shredded book paper to keep your book safe. So I took a little break after my last 6-month subscription ran out, so I have a little note here from Natalie thanking me for joining. Got a new bookmark. Aren't they wrapped so cute? I just love it. So my first book is one I've never heard of before. It's That Deadman Dance by Kim Scott. And this apparently was the Miles Franklin winner of 2011. The Miles Franklin is sort of like the big literary prize here in Australia. And with each book, you also get a little note about why this book was selected for you. So this book apparently was chosen for me because I said that I enjoy Australian literature, diversity, political and gritty. Told through the eyes of black and white, young and old, this is a story about a fledgling Western Australian community in the early 1800s known as the Friendly Frontier. Poetic, warm-hearted and bold, it is a story which shows that first contact did not have to lead to war. So sounds like it's an historical fiction based on or inspired by true events set here in Australia, which I'm excited about. Okay, let's have a look at the next book. Oh, I know this cover. It's a book I've nearly picked up so many times, and I literally nearly ordered it from readings last week, but something told me not to. Perfect. It's The Enlightenment of the Greengage Tree, and I've just always loved this cover. And I don't know if you're someone who loves books and browses bookshops a lot. I'm sure there's probably like a handful of books that you like pick up nearly every time you're at a bookstore. But then, you know, you end up with 5 or 10 books in your hands and you have to bring it down to 3. And there's a couple of books that always sort of, you know, go back on the shelf. This is one of those books that I've done that with a few times now. Oh, I'm so excited. I'm gonna have to look up how to pronounce this author's name, so I'm not gonna try it right now, but when we get to reading it, I will know how to pronounce it. So this book was chosen for me because I said that I like own voices, mythology, and magical realism. An extraordinarily powerful and evocative literary novel set in Iran after the Islamic Revolution of 1979. Using the lyrical magic realism style of classic Persian storytelling, Azar draws the reader deep into the heart of the family caught in the maelstrom of post-revolutionary chaos and brutally sweeps across the ancient land of its people. It is simultaneously confronting and transcendent. Oh, I'm so excited for this. I love it when the Wild Book Box surprises me with books I've never heard of, but then it's also exciting to get a book that you know you've sort of been keen to read. Oh, I'm excited to finally get to this one. Plus, I just think it's such a pretty cover. Oh, love it. Okay, and our third and final one is a bit of a shorter book by the looks. Oh, another one I'm excited about. Sorry, let me put my scissors down. The Lake, Banana Yoshimoto. Okay, so I haven't heard of this book, but I did recently read, I'm pretty sure it's this author. Yes, let me check. Yes, I recently read Kitchen and I really liked it. I think I gave it 4 stars. It's sort of 2 short stories in one book. So I was sort of intending to get around to more by this author. I'm so excited. Good pick, good pick. Yes, we chose this for you because you like modern lit, love and kitchen. So they picked this for me because on their website, you can list some of the books that you've recently enjoyed, and I must have listed Kitchen. A major literary sensation is back with a quietly stunning tour de force about the redemptive power of love. So this is a Japanese novel translated by Michael Emmerich. I'm so excited about this one. So obviously we haven't read them yet, so I can't review them for you. But as far as picks for me, I think this pretty much nails it. We have 2 Australian books, and if you've followed me for any length of time, and I know I said to the Wild Book Box that reading more Australian fiction is very important to me. Also reading about the history of Australia, especially as it concerns colonialism in this country. Own voices stories, I'm always here for. And an author that I've already enjoyed a book by. So this is a really solid pick. I'm really happy with this box already. What would I say I'm most I have to say I'm probably most excited about this because this specifically is a book that I've been wanting to read. And then probably this one is the one I'm next most excited about because I knew that I did want to read more from this author and I really enjoyed Kitchen. So it's a good start. And then I am also very excited about this one. I've really read some great historical fiction set in Australia lately. Like obviously first that comes to mind are things like The Yield, Bilyara Dungalungdarai, or Duray. I've heard it pronounced two different ways and now I'm not really sure. The White Girl by Tony Birch, and even The Coconut Children, although that's more recent history. So I'm finding that I'm quite liking historical fiction set in Australia. That's not a blanket statement. There've been plenty that I haven't enjoyed, but I'm hopeful. This looks good. Although I will say I've had very, very mixed experiences with winners of the Miles Franklin. Some of them, like Tara June Winch's The Yield, have been some of my favourite books. Others have been some of my least favourite. So I'm curious to see how we go with this one. So that's the unboxing done. Now we're going to jump straight into the vlog. We're going to read these 3 books together over the next month and I'm going to tell you what I think. If you are in Australia and you're interested in checking the Wild Book Box out, I will leave a link to them in the description box below. But that's enough yabbering. It's time to get reading. So I was planning on checking with you like halfway through the book, but I've already finished it. I read The Lake by Banana Yoshimoto. I started this late at night and then I finished it the next morning. So this was just a really quick read for me and I didn't have time to stop and think about pulling the camera out. So let's just talk about the book. It's about 190 pages and Banana Yoshimoto's writing is really kind of just straightforward, really easy to read. It's also not very plot heavy. There's not a lot going on. It's much more introspective and a look at, in particular, 2 main characters. Our main character and our narrator is Chihiro, and she is a young woman who's lost her mother, and the grief and the experience of losing her mother is a big part of her journey in this book. The other main character is Nakajima, who is Chihiro's neighbor, and they end up sort of connecting and forming a relationship. He has also lost his mother, so they connect through that grief, but we find out fairly early on that he has had some kind of trauma in his childhood that affects him in terms of his relationships, how he connects with people, and also sexually. And it's such a short book that I don't want to tell you much more other than it really is just about these 2 people who have experienced quite strong grief, although they've experienced it in different ways because they had different relationships with their mothers. And then also sort of exploring and navigating this relationship, this budding relationship, which they both find a lot of safety and sense of home and connection in, while one of them is really struggling with trauma that sort of limits his ability to connect in an intimate way. Ultimately, it's just really atmospheric. The setting, it's quite a small story, I suppose, and it's dark in tone, but it's not aggressively dark, you know what I mean? Like it's not horrific, or it feels very real about 2 people sort of just navigating the sad parts of being human, the difficult parts of being human, and the challenges of 2 people who have a lot of different difficult feelings coming together. Like that's ultimately what this book is about, and it's really sweet, and I don't know, I found it very touching. And even though this might sound strange because it is quite sad, a lot of it, I found it quite cozy as well. I think just because we get such intimate thoughts from Chihiro, and she's just very reflective and insightful of both her own internal experience, but also just in her desire to understand Nakajima more and sort of like trying to learn how to love him. I don't know, it's sweet. It didn't really feel much like Kitchen at all. I mean, I'm getting a theme that a lot of people die in Banana Yoshimoto's work. There's a lot of death and grief explored in the 3 stories that I've read now. But the tone feels very different in this. And I think even though this is still quite a short book, it is longer than Kitchen and the other story in that book. So I enjoyed having a bit more time with these characters, and I really liked this. I liked it a lot. I'm not sure which of the 2 books I'm going to read next, but I will try to actually update you as I'm going, so I'll talk to you soon. Wow, the lighting is really terrible in here, isn't it? This is the first time I'm filming in our new bedroom, in our new apartment. It's the middle of the day, but our bedroom's kind of quite dark, which is nice. And I've been up and about and busy, but I decided to come back to bed just to get comfy and cozy and read a little bit this afternoon. I started this probably a day or 2 ago now. I'm about 100 pages in, so I'm here for an early check-in. I really struggled with the first, I'd say, 50 pages. The writing, I just found it very hard to sink into. And I don't know if that's a criticism of the writing in particular. I don't think so. There's nothing I can point to that I don't like about the writing. So I'm thinking that it just must be like a me and a connecting thing. I just kind of wasn't settling into the rhythm, and I was like finding myself having to work very hard to like try to imagine what was going on, to try to figure out who these characters were. Like I was doing a lot of the work. And then I'd, you know, 2 pages later, I'd be like, wait, what's happening again? Who's this person? I was just kind of confused and lost in the middle of it all. A lot of characters are introduced quite quickly. And I just didn't really feel like I'd figured out who one person was before the next one was introduced, if that makes sense. And then it's also so far it's very plot focused. Like we have these characters and there is certainly characterization of them, and I'm sure it's done well. It's just not really working 100% for me yet. And it's very much like this happened and then this happened and then this happened, and it sort of feels like it's jumping around in time, although I'm not really sure if it is. I feel a bit disoriented, I guess. And I don't think it's overly complex, so I don't quite know what I'm not getting. I feel like it's a me thing, but I don't know what's happening. Basically, so far we are getting to know some of the Noongar, some of the Indigenous people of the area of Western Australia, the south coast, as well as some of the settlers. And this is set in the early 1800s, although it's sort of jumping around a bit. So around like 1830s-ish. And basically it's about their first contact, and then also the relationship that develops between different white and Indigenous people. I don't know what it is that I'm finding this so hard to follow, but I am just sort of like getting confused between who's who and when's when and what's what. Good morning, friends. I'm sitting here getting ready for the day, and I thought I'd update you on how I'm going with that Deadman dance. I'm not going well. I think I'm going to DNF it. I've sort of moved on to other things for now. I'm not getting rid of this book just yet, so depending on how I'm feeling after we read the next book, I might come back to it, but I don't want to promise anything, because I almost feel like I was like pushed into like borderline reader slump territory with this book. So I'm feeling a bit worse for wear as far as my reading's concerned. And I'm sort of upset with myself because I feel like in theory, this is a great book for me. Like it ticks so many of the boxes that I tend to enjoy. And it touches on similar themes and ideas and even like eras and things like that are prevalent in other books that I have really enjoyed. There are a lot of characters introduced, and we also are moving through like quite a large period of time. There's also sort of jumping back and forth between time. There's a lot of jumping back and forth between different characters. And usually like I'm fine with that. I've enjoyed books that do similar things. I think what isn't working for me here is that all of those characters, or a lot of them, were sort of introduced together, but not in a way that made me emotionally sort of connect to any of them. So when we're sort of jumping between them and then jumping back and forth between time, I just felt really disoriented. I do feel kind of bad. This is the first of the Wild Book Box books that I have DNF'd. And also it's only the second book I've DNF'd all year. So DNFing books is something I don't do often. And with that other example, it was because like I clearly was not going to get along with that book from the outset. The humour, it's the Rosie Project. It's a huge book in Australia. So I'm taking a break from my Wild Book Box books. I'll get back to them. I'm currently reading the first book in the Earthsea series. And I also just read like a little graphic novel. So I'm just sort of cleansing my palette, and then I'll see you soon when I'm ready to get back to books and novels with our next one. Good evening, friends. It is a cold night here in Melbourne, and I'm cuddled up on the couch, and I've been getting stuck into The Enlightenment of the Greengage Tree by Shokoofeh Azar. This is a wild ride. I have just sort of hit the 100-page mark, and it's like nearly a 300-page book, I think. And there's actually quite a lot happening in this book. We're sort of following a family of 5. Baha is the narrator of the book, and she's like a 13-year-old girl, and then she has 2 siblings, a brother and a sister, and her mum and dad. And right at the beginning of the book, there's 2 events that coincide. One is the mother's enlightenment that she has at the same time that her son, the older brother, is executed. It's sort of jumping around in time a bit too, though, because then we sort of go back and learn a bit more about why the brother was arrested and what happened there. So there's sort of like events happening, but they're not really the most interesting or compelling part of the book so far, because it does say on the back that it's also magical realism, and that's quite strong in this book.
there's a lot of ghosts, both in terms of just other people that the family meet, or even that, you know, might only have contact with momentarily, but then we sort of follow the ghost and learn a bit more about them for the rest of the chapter. Also, I suppose this is a bit spoilery because you don't find out until about page 70, so if you plan on reading this book, and so far I would recommend it, and you don't want any spoilers, then maybe skip forward. I'll put like a little spoiler note here. So for the first 70 pages we're talking about this family, and we know that the older brother dies, but come about page 70-ish, we discover that Baha, the sister who is narrating, is also dead. She was killed in a fire that had to do with the revolution, or just before the revolution. I don't really know a lot about the history here, so sometimes I get a little bit confused about the specific events, but I'm not finding that that's detracting from my experience at all. Anyway, she was burned alive in this fire, sort of accidentally. The fire was lit on purpose, but I don't think they knew she was there. And she like describes being burned alive. She says she doesn't really remember the pain, but she remembers like the smell of her burning flesh. And then she sort of had a decision about whether she wanted to go on to the spirit world, I guess, or whether she wanted to stay. And she decided it was best for her and for her family if she stayed and kept them company. So her family go to her funeral, everything, but she's still just kind of like around, playing with her sister, you know, doing stuff. It's also just really beautifully written, the whole thing. It's so evocative, and it's just, I don't know, it's just hitting the spot for me, I guess. There's one scene where a bunch of books are burned, and like the characters on the covers and the characters within the books are sort of like screaming out to one another and wailing, and it's intense, but it's really effective, I suppose, because it's one thing to sort of, you know, intellectualize the loss of books, but then it's another to sort of like literally have the death of these characters and like the access of the people in this book to these characters and these worlds that they know and love. Like that is a loss, like a personal loss as well as like an intellectual one. But that's all I've got for now. I'm going to keep reading, and I'll talk to you soon.
I finished the Enlightenment of the Greengage tree today, and I loved it. I read it kind of past my bedtime last night, and then I woke up a little bit earlier so that I could finish it this morning, because I didn't want it to end, but I also wanted to find out what happened. I was enthralled. So Shokoofeh Azar is a political refugee who now lives in Australia. She came here in 2011. I think she was imprisoned 3 times for her like political activism and her writing, is what I understand. And from what I could gather online, this is translated from Farsi, and the translator has decided to remain anonymous for safety reasons. So Shokoofeh was like a journalist and a writer in Iran, and she was born 7 years before the revolution, from what I understand. And I think she's also published some short stories, but this is her first novel, and it's the first I've read of hers. It covers several decades, really like up until close to present day, since the revolution in 1979. And we really focus on this family of 5. And I did actually watch an interview with Shokoofeh. I think it was Cover to Cover, which is here on YouTube, so I'll leave a link to it below if you're interested. And she spoke about how this family of 5, each one sort of represents, as she sees it, like a different person in modern Iran, or a different person in terms of how they responded or were affected by the revolution. For example, the father is sort of like an intellectual. They're quite a middle-class, well-off family, it seems like. The mother is a poet, or wants to be a poet, and she doesn't want to wear a headscarf. Shokoofeh describes the older brother as being representative of the young generation at the time of the revolution, being sort of like well-educated, sort of progressive young people who were persecuted for that fact. And she talks about how she feels like it's important not to forget them, but also not to forget that these were young people. In this book, I can't remember how old the brother is when he dies, but he's not very old. He's in his 20s. And I think that's a big part of the book, is that it's not only about the death and the loss of people, but also of the potential and who they could have been. And I think that's what the ghosts represent so well. Not everybody has a ghost that kind of hangs around, but their ghosts are really prevalent in this story. The sister Beta is just a young girl who wants to be a ballerina, and is sort of like quite romantic and all of that. And then our narrator, the last sister, is Baha. And Shokoofeh talks about her sort of representing herself in some ways, her younger self, but also of just representing children and the innocent in the revolution. So this family and the individual like members of the family are sort of our touchstone throughout the novel, but they're not the only people or even beings that we follow. It is very magical realism. I know sometimes when books are described that way, they're sort of like just like there's little hints here and there of a magical element. In this book, the magical, the mystical, and the mythical are just soaked through every layer. But there is also chapters in here where we follow very peripheral characters. So there's sort of like several stories within this story as well. I will say that as a white Australian, I do not know a whole lot about the history of Iran, and certainly I don't know the specifics of the revolution. So that's just me being honest about my positioning in terms of this. I know that a lot of people have really loved this book and enjoyed the language and enjoyed the sort of like the narrative devices that are used and the structure of it. I very much fall into that category. I did also see though that some people who are more familiar with the history and some Iranians themselves didn't really love this depiction. Some did that I saw, but others sort of felt like it was a little bit too stark, I suppose, in its depiction of like pre-revolution good, post-revolution bad, if that makes sense. I do think that that is very much a product of Shokoofeh's own experience, and I think it fits with the characters in here though, from what I understand. Shokoofeh, I think herself did come from a family sort of similar to this one in the sense that they're well educated, they're kind of middle upper class. And she did mention in the interview that her father was one of only 2% of people, I think, who voted against the regime. So I think from what I can gather, this has maybe a level of bias that some people are sort of noticing if they're more familiar with the history than I am. And I just wanted to point that out, just sort of acknowledge it. I do think it makes sense for the narrator and the author. I think this is quite genuine and true to her experience, if that makes sense. Overall though, I ate this up. The fantastical elements, the mysticism, it's quite a spiritual book, or a lot of the characters are very spiritual too. They didn't diminish from the realness and the harshness. They sort of added to it, elevated it, provided a richness that I think helped me understand it emotionally a little bit better. I don't know. I think this was brilliant. I think it might be one of my favorite books that I've read this month. It was wonderful. A little update, I suppose, on that Deadman dance. I read another chapter or two. So I'm at, what am I at? Page 237 of 400. And I mean, I could sort of like not upload this vlog and just give it another couple of weeks and see if I get back to this book. But I think I just need to sort of sit this book down with no expectation. And if I get back to it, then you'll find out in a reading wrap up in a month or two. But for now, I think I do just need to sort of set it aside. Another element of this that I think I didn't really recognize immediately that was sort of frustrating me is just how heavily focused this is on male characters. Any woman depicted in here is just a wife or a mother. That's sort of it. And even then they have like barely any interaction with the plot. They just are inconsequential. They're just there. And so it's a story about dudes. And I don't know. I think that's another thing that I just find a little frustrating. And then, of course, the other book that I read earlier on this month, which I also really loved, was The Lake. So an interesting mix of books this month and an interesting mix of responses from me. I'm sure it's pretty obvious about like the order in terms of my preference of these books. I think The Lake and The Enlightenment of the Greengage Tree are both really solid reads, but in terms of like the emotional impact and my response to it, this one definitely like hit me harder, and I think I enjoyed those really magical realism sort of elements to it. I loved this book. Close second would be The Lake. I think, is The Greengage Tree a 5-star read? I don't know, I'm gonna have to sit on that. It's either a 4.5 or a 5. This is like a solid 4. So although I have DNF'd, at least for now, one of the books, I am still so thrilled with this, like the outcome of this wild book box. 2 4+ star reads is a result, in my opinion. So I hope you've enjoyed following along with me while I've read these 3 books. And I would love to hear in the comments below if you have, or if you're planning to read any of these. And if anybody has read that Deadman dance, let me know what you think I should do. But that is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. I will talk to you again soon in another video, and hopefully in the comments too. And until next time, so much love. Bye.